virtual reality simulator designed for Loadmasters to do EPs and airdrop scenarios, and then whatever else you think could benefit a Loadmaster in a virtual reality simulator environment. But it's on display out here, so everybody's welcome to try it after the presentation. But I'm going to go through a little bit on the history and the technology and how the system came to be and what we hope to do with it in the future. So now we'll go to the video. I know it's early, so just sit back and enjoy the presentation.
The virtual Loadmaster training system is the first simulator designed specifically for the Loadmaster C-130 airdrop training. It was conceived as a way to conduct emergency procedures training for certain scenarios that were just too difficult or dangerous to recreate any other way. For example, in the airdrop scenario where a payload gets stuck on extraction, you can have catastrophic consequences that you cannot recreate in an actual aircraft because it would be too dangerous. But in virtual reality, you can give students the opportunity to identify and apply the correct emergency procedures so that the first time they see it isn't during an actual emergency. About the virtual Loadmaster training system is the virtual environment allows certain interactions between crew members, such as hand signals, body language, and just relative interactions that you can't do in any 2D or computer-based simulator. The virtual reality training allows you to interact with all the systems on the aircraft to physically operate the cargo handling system, the intercom system, and other aircraft systems related to the Loadmaster duties. One of the best parts about the virtual Loadmaster training system is that it can be used at the earliest levels to introduce students to the basic equipment familiarization, all the way through instructor upgrade to have students role-playing other students and so on.
Yeah, my favorite part of that presentation was when the Loadmaster just sees the engine fired. Nope, we're not doing that today. Close the door. So you may have seen the other company logo on there, Pennant. They're the software developers. The background with Capewell, we're a manufacturing facility up in Connecticut. We also have another facility in Virginia, but the airdrop focus of our products is in Connecticut, and for the many years we've developed mechanical systems for airdrop and different payload technologies. We have engineers up there working on the next generation of platforms. But we kind of got into this because we'd often sell equipment and users would ask for training. So we'd have to get a whole schedule planned out. We'd have to get an aircraft available, send somebody over there, and spend a lot of money to take a Loadmaster basic airdrop course. And still, you wouldn't cover everything that you could possibly cover. So we have experience in training in actual airdrop, and we kind of had this idea for maybe there's a better way. Could there be a way to give a Loadmaster a sim like the pilots had? My personal background, I'm former Air Force. My colleague Bill, he's former Air Force. He was a tanker guy. I did airdrop of a different kind because my payloads exploded when they hit the ground. But we both wore flight suits, so it's great to be back here among bag wearers. And we've really, especially this show, we're everybody here is a potential user of this system, so it's a perfect presentation for us, and we hope that you see that too. So our goal is to enhance the training for Loadmasters and fill a training gap that we think is out there. And by training gap, I mean specifically an airdrop. Kind of catalyst for this project was this mishap in 1989. Some of you may be familiar with it. Double 28 extraction for a Sherman tank. They withheld in the first pass and made a quick racetrack to come around and drop for a second attempt. Load got hung up. The drag on the chutes brought the C-130 down. They had to make a crash landing. The senior loadmaster was killed on impact, and the other loadmaster lost his leg. There's more on that towards the end of the presentation, but that is kind of the idea. We wanted to be able to recreate that situation so crews could train just that eventuality, because based on our experience, we hadn't seen any way to recreate that sort of thing in aircraft to any high level of fidelity. So we felt like that's something we didn't want Loadmasters to see it for the first time when it actually happened. So a lot of folks are familiar with what the pilots get for their simulators, really Gucci systems with full motion. A lot of investment is spent in the front end. The entire curriculum is built around being able to sign off currencies and complete certain requirements in the sim because it's a primary training tool. There's systems set up to network crews across the country. They can do virtual exercises in the simulator. There's a really good infrastructure for the front end, but there's nothing like that for the Loadmasters. The closest thing you have are the park task trainers down at the schoolhouse, some specific trainers that are focused on one thing, like the observer trainer for the incoming fire. I mean, that's great for what it is, but it only does that one thing. So the comparison between what you have on the front end and the back end is really quite eye-opening when you do a side-by-side. The level of immersion, you got that compared to a TV screen. The system's fidelity, everything is recreated one-to-one in the cockpit, but here you've got a Windows-based user interface panel, which looks nothing like the aircraft. And the crew coordination is very arbitrary. I mean, crew coordination, talking to each other, or simulated, whereas they're on headsets actually on the intercom, just as if they're in a real aircraft. So you're looking at night and day between what's available for the front end and what's available for the back end. What we really found out as we did more research into virtual reality training, especially since the Air Force is taking a real serious look at it nowadays, that there has always been a gap in ground school learning and your first flight. And anybody who's got wings on, I'm sure, knows that that first flight is a complete helmet fire. You're way behind the aircraft. You're struggling just to keep your situational awareness. And your actual learning from the fire hose is pretty minimal. It's the second, third, and fourth sword is where it really starts to click, and you start to get really good effective training. That's not to say we're trying to replace flying, because that's not the case. But we've seen what simulation training can do in the civilian world. We've seen what it can do in the military. And getting repetition in the sim before you go to the real deal is a no-brainer. It's a big benefit. So there's this gap between the book knowledge of just memorizing the TOs and the limitations and stuff in the systems, and the actual application. In the middle there, learning theory says you have to have comprehension, and that comes from drills, comes from muscle memory, from repetition, just like any other task or any other skill. The more you practice, the better you get at it. And what virtual reality and simulators allow is that repetition. So we're not trying to recreate the aircraft down to the exact detail. We don't have to build a C-130, but we can get the 90% solution so that your brain retains that information, and you go from the knowledge to the application, and that first flight is then an effective flight, and you're not wasting time not knowing where you stand, or you're way behind because you don't understand the pacing between when the events happen and the next event. So we think we can make training more effective that way, and so does the Air Force, because they've done this experiment. Show of hands, anybody heard of the pilot training next? Okay, so what the Air Force did, they took an experimental class of 12 students. They gave them, let's skip ahead real quick. They gave them VR flight sims in their rooms. And they said, have at it, practice as much as you want. We're gonna give you the check ride after you've completed everything and think you're ready in the sim. They cut the training down from 13 months to 7 months, and everybody passed. All the instructors said they can't tell the difference between a winged student from this VR program compared to a winged student from the conventional program. The instructors who taught those VR students said they could focus more on the higher level learning, building situation awareness, working on making a good judgment, and the sort of things where human experience and instructor experience comes into play. Because they didn't have to worry so much about the mechanical skills of how to fly a coordinated turn. They took care of that in sim on their own in VR. So what General Quast says here is, going back to that idea of skipping the gap between knowledge and application, you need a lot of cognitive repetitions. So instead of spending millions of dollars on a huge simulator facility that you have to travel to, VR technology allows you to take this system and put it in every squadron and use it as a resource, like it's another tail number you can walk to. And the more repetitions you get in there, the better it is. That's just common sense. And he also comments that you don't need super high-end, holodeck type level realism, because your brain will just accept it and get effective training. It will retain the knowledge. And you'll see that if you get a chance to try it, which we all hope you will. Once you're in there, after a few moments, you're cognitive that it's a simulation, but your brain just starts acting and interacting as if you're really there. It just accepts it. Okay, this is reality now. Especially if you get to the edge, somebody usually will push. And show of hands, anybody who's tried VR before and a gaming system? Yeah. If not, then your kids or your grandkids may have been talking about it. There's a lot of development going into it on the commercial side, and that's kind of why these systems are affordable now. 5 years ago, you were looking at multi-million dollars to have something custom made, and the performance wasn't there yet, but now you'll see for yourself, it's pretty incredible. So like I said, they took pilots, they got the training down to 6 months. Oh, sorry, that's just 7 months. And you can build on stuff faster. They actually had these students, while they're waiting after they've been winged, while they were waiting for the next assignment, say they were going to the HERC or they were going to fighters, they downloaded the aircraft they're going to next, and they started their familiarization in their rooms at home before they even PCS the next base. They were learning the aircraft, getting familiar with the cockpit, the switchology, the startup procedures. So the flexibility and the nimbleness of a system like this is incredible. You can push potential upgrades to an aircraft to the VR sim and have it tried out to like initial operational testing, or just work on new procedures or building up a new tactical procedure, all in VR. It's really incredible how flexible this system can be. But the instructors love it. We expected to get a lot of pushback, especially from old timers when they looked at this newfangled VR technology. You can't replace my flight hours. Everybody who's tried it, even complete skeptics, have been turned around. One Loadmaster instructor in particular, she came to our booth and said, I heard about this VR thing, it doesn't make any sense. I'm just here so I can say that I tried it and so I can go shoot it down when I get back to my home unit. And she put it on there and she's just like, wow, I could do so much with this. The first day I can tell them where they need to stand, what they need to be looking at. Because as the instructor, you have so many different tools. You can obviously see what they're seeing, you can do the playback. There's no alibis here if you're the student. It's actually, it's going to be a bit of a revolution because you can't lie. You say, oh, I looked at this this lock, I checked it out, and the instructor went, no, you didn't. I saw exactly where you were looking. You were not looking there. You need to work on your scan. So, Bill and I being front-end guys, being in a lot of flight sim, we wanted to recreate that capability, to go through the after-action report, to debrief at every step along the way what you did, and we want to bring that to the Loadmasters. So the VR technology, like I said, is really developing in the last few years. It's being picked up in the commercial sector. There's doctors are doing virtual surgery, doing like remote surgery with it. You've probably seen the parachute sim. That's been around for probably a decade or so, but it's getting better and better. Commercial industry on like driving cranes and heavy equipment, doing your initial training in there. All because the price of the systems has come way down. I mean, you can get this stuff literally at Best Buy, and that's literally where we got our hardware for the demonstration. And it gets better every year. It's comparable to like an Xbox or a PlayStation console. Every year they're trying to one-up the other company and improve the performance and the fidelity. In fact, we just upgraded to the next level of headset, but we're going through testing with it, so you don't have to see it now. But graphics will get better, performance will get better, and the controls will get better. And it'll be readily available, so you don't have to worry about part breaking down and not having the replacement available. But some of the things in VR, like, it's not the holodeck, so you're not going to be able to reach out and grab an apple and feel it. At least not yet. People are working on that. But right now, there's not a lot of forced feedback, if you catch my meaning. So there are limitations to virtual reality, and I'll be the first one to tell you it's not going to be the end-all silver bullet for everything. But what it is good for is procedures and crew coordination and orientation. So comments from the pilot program on the pilot training was that what they expected was going to be a big problem and limitation, not being able to feel the G's on the aircraft as you're pulling. They realized that's not necessary to get learning. It's great if, it doesn't beat the real thing, but in order to get the goal of familiarization, get the procedures, get the muscle memory down, it's not necessary. Your brain will interpret simulation as real enough that you retain the knowledge. So, a couple years ago, we were at a show that was doing a parachute industry association presentation, and this idea for a VR system has been in the back of my mind since since Facebook bought that big company for like $2 billion. And we've always had a challenge with doing training for countries overseas because of cost. So this company, Pennant, was demonstrating a simulator that had a C-130, and it was a 3D environment. And I said, hey, could you do that in virtual reality? And they said, yeah, we could do that in virtual reality. Why? What would you want to do with it? Well, we're the experts in airdrop, and they're the experts in virtual reality and simulation, so we kind of put our heads together, and we came up with the virtual Loadmaster training system because we saw a need for it. So we worked real close with the Connecticut Guard, because they're in our backyard in South Windsor, Connecticut. And so we had this idea, and we approached them and said, what would you think? What would be a useful tool? How should it work? Well, it should be really good visuals. It's got to look like the real deal. We want to focus on EPs and airdrop procedures, because we don't get enough time in flight. We don't have enough flight time, and there's no sim up here for us. The only way to do it is to go down to Little Rock, and what they have is kind of meh. And what they weren't really impressed with the system, especially for its cost. They said we don't want to have any simisms. We don't want to have to learn how to use the sim to use the sim. And we want to be able to scale the difficulty. So we're going to have young Loadmasters coming through. This is their first assignment. We're going to have experienced guys who need currencies, and we're going to have instructors. So we need a whole spectrum of capability. And of course, it's got to be affordable. So what we came up with was the demo that you saw in the video. It's been about 2 years in development, and we sold the first system to Connecticut. And they're essentially playing around with it now. They're using it as a training tool. And they're evaluating how far they can take this, if it can in fact be good enough to use as a currency trainer and to actually sign off requirements for certain exercises, certain tasks you have to do every month. But you can simulate EPs like hung load. Again, like that was our inspiration for this whole deal. Loose platform, toe jumper, whatever's in the checklist, and the checklist is in the sim. Whatever's in the checklist, you got a procedure for it. Our goal is to mimic it in the sim. So you can work on identifying the malfunction, first of all, communicating it to the crew, going through your corrective actions. Of course, it records everything that happens. You can play it back from a point of view. You can play it back from a virtual camera. You can put on another headset and get it with them and literally stand over and look over their shoulder and watch what they're doing. And everything is built around a class roster. So you have students' grades saved in a certain folder. You can have their records, available for progression, see how they're coming along with training. But it's not just a, play around with it. It's meant to be a classroom tool. So going back to the scalability, we didn't script anything in the simulator. So it's not like a computer-based training module where it goes through a bunch of slides and tells you what to do and goes like that. It's all based on the instructor's input. So whatever the instructor wants to set up for time of day, weather, route, and route, and whatever they want to throw at you, they have control at the instructor console. And there's a lot of different variables you can play with, and you don't necessarily know what's going to come. If you're doing an EP sim, you may not know what to expect. But we wanted to do it that way because that's more realistic. And it's set up so that you could have a big screen overlay. So you could actually do this in a classroom. You may have a class of 4 students and you're going to run through one at a time, but while that student's in the sim, the other 3 can be observing and learning through watching their experience. Basically, ride along, learn from their mistakes. So the way the system works is you have a headset. This particular model is configurable for wired or wireless. And we think that's going to be an option because some units have said they like the idea of the wire because it recreates the tether to be on the COM port, which you kind of have to manage anyway. But others have said, no, we prefer to be wireless, but that's an option, be wireless. You'll see that there's sensors mounted in the corner of the room, and those are actually, they're not sensors technically, but they're emitters. They're putting out a laser infrared grid, which the headset will pick up. And they have sensors 360 all around, and that does the geometry, does the calculus, figure out where you are, and your velocity and everything down to the millimeter, and does it so fast your brain doesn't even tell there's any delay. And the controls are basically held in your hand or worn on your hand. So we have the capability to use a glove like this so that the interactions are completely intuitive. To be completely honest, this is brand new technology and is cutting edge that may need another year or 2 development. But this summer there was another hardware option that came out, and this just goes to reinforce the quick development of this technology, how fast and furious it's coming. This is I think where we're going to go next. It's a controller, it has the benefits of button inputs and also regular hand interactions by grabbing things. It'll track your fingers, you can give each other hand signals, play rock, paper, scissors, whatever. It's all done through sensors in the controller. But it's also scalable, so we have it set up here in our booth. You can set up in the classroom. Basically, however far apart you want to put those emitters is how far you can recreate the scale of the system. So you could go, if you wanted to go full scale, if you had a hangar, if you wanted to do a full C-130 cargo bay, could. And I mentioned it's upgradable because new technology is coming out for it, and it'll just get better and better. What's really unique about this system, and I don't think you see in a lot of other sims, is the ability to network two Loadmasters. So it's meant to be used with two people. And in fact, that's just part of the story because it could be used with up to 18 or 20. But for the Loadmaster role, it's meant to have two users like you would on an aircraft. So you can practice your CRM. You can have crews go out there, and if your flight got canceled for weather or the jet broke, you could just run the sortie in the sim. You'd be doing your roles like you normally would. You'd be doing your crew coordination and communication. The instructor who's running the sim can role play the front end, hit the checklist items, and they can actually affect the jet the way they would in their actual flight. And it's even, there for doing rehearsals. If somebody's got a real big event coming up or an ORE, you're going to fly a ORI inspection, you can practice throughout ahead of time. But that's really unique to this system because seeing somebody else, seeing their arms move and their head move, you can see where they're looking. It's quite unique. So right now the system is built for C-130H. And the H, because that's what we had access to, we were able to take really good pictures. The process we went through, the programmers at Pennant kind of went through the code, and we said, this is how airdrop works, this is the kind of sequence of events that has to happen, and these are the bits of the aircraft that the Loadmasters will have to interact with, so those have to be fully replicated. So we took really good high-res pictures of the whole interior. We did detailed photos and videos of the equipment in motion, and we focused on the checklist items, so going from your 20-minute pre-release down to your post-release to hit them. All those, make sure you could do that on a various number of payloads, as you see here. There's the extraction systems, the gravity systems, where you've got NVG filter on there, so you can practice night ops with a flashlight. We try to give a good sample of the different mission sets you might do. That is to say, we would like to do more aircraft, but everything that's done at this point was through our IR&D funding. To go ahead with other aircraft, we're looking for some partners or some sponsor units to help develop the next leap, which will be C-17, C-30J, combat offload, and regular onload procedures, and to help provide some expertise where we don't have it in-house. Another great thing about the system is you can import your own terrain. So your favorite drop zone, you can just drop in the files that have the elevations in there, and the satellite imagery. If you're going real world, someplace new, you can mission rehearsal here, drop that thing in there and do an exercise with it. It does retain the potential to network with your high-level simulators. So the full motion stuff, the MMCT, that all uses what they call HLA, higher level architecture. And this system was built with that in mind. So as of right now, it doesn't plug and play with other simulators, but it's never that easy. It's always a case-by-case basis. But it was built to be able to do that in the future. All right. And going ahead, I mentioned the other airframes. We have definitely interest from the C-17 and the J community. Foreign countries, Airbus, the C2 with Japan, they're talking to us. And we hope that this will become something where you can apply it to any airlift or airdrop asset, and you just pick the plane from the drop-down menu, and that's what you're going to be flying that day. It's also got placeholders for the paratroopers side. So we know we have a lot of experience with the personnel airdrops, paratroopers, the Army Airborne. We have on the roadmap is a plan to have a jump master in there as well. So you're simulating a stick of jumpers, and they're looking for, are they rigged right? Are they hooked up right? Is there throwing a tow jumper in there and going through all those situations? In addition to the Loadmasters who are doing their jobs as well. We like to do just the regular onload and offload. We didn't focus on that right now because we have capability at Little Rock. You have the fuselage trainers, on-load and off-load. You can practice on the ground with a free tail number. But as long as you have a virtual reality system for a Loadmaster, it should be able to do the basic on-load and off-load. And I talked a bit about integrating with other systems as well. So as of today, we've really seen a lot of kind of explosion in interest this last year. Kicked off by the Connecticut Air National Guard at the 103rd. They purchased the system earlier this year. We've got it set up in their room with the MMCT in the background. And what they actually plan to do is play around with having a joint sim training event. So you've got your MMCT crew running through their procedures up in the front. And as they're going through procedures and opening up the doors, configuring the aircraft, the instructor on the Loadmaster Sim can follow along and do the same things, and the Loadmaster in VR will have the same pacing, and they can communicate over the headset. So it's not a fully networked sim, and we're not there yet, but it's just kind of like a way to make it work, where you have the Loadmaster involved with the MCT. We've also talked to Natick Soldier Systems because the Army's equipment is what's going on these payloads, and they expressed interest in, could use this for the joint inspection piece. Can they try out different payloads in it? How could a jump master be involved? Can you do mixed loads? So they were really impressed with the technology, and we're going to work with them to see how much we can develop for the Army side. And last month we were up at Hanscom Air Force Base. The ATAC for Connecticut actually invited us up to a conference where they had all the general officers from the National Guard, New England states and New York. They were having a meeting about training, and they had us up one afternoon and put all the one star and 2 stars through the sim, and they had a blast. So it almost kind of brings you back to being a kid again for a little bit, just because it's such a cool experience. But they were all very impressed, and we're going to be talking to Delaware and New York. They like to learn more about it. And our goal here is, if there's any interest, we'd like to take the thing and bring it to your unit and do a demonstration on site. Because it is portable, we put it up in a couple Pelican cases, it's just a few computers, and bring it to you. We've been down to Little Rock at the schoolhouse. They have a million different ideas on how to use something like this. They like the cost, because compared to the big boys like Lockheed, this is dirt cheap. It's not a cheap product, but it's very affordable. Like I said, Connecticut bought it with innovation dollars. I think 2 years ago the Air Force put out a program and gave every wing some amount of money to try new things. And the Air Force used that funding mechanism Connecticut used that funding mechanism to buy the VR system. And we've also presented directly to Lieutenant General Thomas. He liked it. He said we should go ahead and talk to AETC. And he's on record saying that, because we have his exec's notes. But everybody we've shown it to has been really supportive. They love the idea. And Connecticut was able to get it through the funding contract really quick, in a matter of months. So, and the latest, we've just been invited by the Training and Simulation SPO to demonstrate the system at ITSEC. It's a training and simulation event in Orlando. So they want us in the Air Force booth, which is a big deal. We're already under contract with Connecticut, so they want to show what the latest and greatest is. And this is a very unique system. So hopefully, knock on wood, we'll be in Orlando in December. You can come see us there at the Air Force booth. So once again, it's the first of its kind. There may be others trying to replicate its success, or in some facet. There's a lot of maintenance trainers out there, but this is one built for you guys, for the Loadmasters specifically. It uses off-the-shelf hardware to keep the costs down and make sure parts are available. And we plan to roll out updates every year, improving the capabilities. If there's a new payload that comes online, or a new system that the Army comes up with for dropping hardware, we'll put it in the sim, play around with it. And if you wanted to bring it with you on deployment, you could pack it up and forward deploy this thing too. So coming back to the kind of origin story of this idea, I mentioned one Loadmaster was killed and the other Loadmaster lost his leg. A few weeks ago, my colleague Bill was playing tennis with a gentleman. He noticed the guy had a prosthetic leg. And they got to talking about what they each do, and Bill says, I was in the Air Force, I was a navigator. And this guy, Adam, says, I was in the Air Force too. Well, what did you do, Adam? I was a Loadmaster. Oh man, you should check out our system. We make stuff for Loadmasters. In fact, one of the biggest reasons we developed this is because, there was a really bad accident in '89. And of course, Adam says, yeah, that was me. So, if that doesn't tell you we're on the right track here, I think that meant a lot for Adam to come and get back into a C-130 for the first time in 30 years. He went through exactly what had happened. He talked to us about where he was exactly when that thing happened. But that was a real good inspiration for us, saying, we really need to get this in the hands of as many people as we can, and hopefully prevent something like that from happening again. So I'll open up to questions, but I'm going to leave enough time for the remainder of the presentation for you guys to go out there and try it yourself. Again, we'll be here all day, so no rush, but I'll just take some questions and we can go over to the booth in a little bit.
How much does it cost?
So the total sale value is $250,000. That's negotiable. It may be one system or maybe a joint buy. One thing we're looking at with the National Guard Bureau is if they can do a large order for several units, we can definitely work with the price on that. We talked about doing a leasing option, or we even talked about, you can send folks to Connecticut to do the training there, and we'll do training as a service, and that'll be completely different. It'll be a per class basis, but leasing or progress payments are definitely up for negotiation.
How does it work with, I don't know much about virtual, how does it work with glasses? People wear glasses.
Yeah, you just wear your glasses like you normally would, yeah. If it doesn't fit in the one we have, you can put it in a different insert that's a thinner foam. You fit over the glasses. Yeah.
Now, is it proprietary or not proprietary? Can we share it with other units if we buy a C-130J?
It's based on a license. So if you've got one system, you own the license to use that system. And you can bring other people in to use it. But you have a USB key, so you can't just copy it on the computer. So you have to have that one key, it's unique. But we would encourage folks to cross-train. We're open to whatever, getting it user base expanded. Yes.
Is it something that a student can actually take home and use it on their own personal VR systems?
So at this point, it requires a pretty beefy desktop computer, so you wouldn't be taking this home. There has been talk about doing a mobile training that's more based on like an interactive walkthrough. You could do that at home with a mobile headset. But this system you really need to have set up in a semi-permanent solution because it's got to be calibrated for the space you're in.
If you purchase a different aircraft, C-130J or C-17, how long does it take you guys to develop that aircraft?
So we've quoted anywhere from 6 months to a year. The fundamentals of the airdrop, how the system works is already there. The user interface is already there. It's just a matter of modeling the interior and all the mechanical systems. So 6 months for like a J, because it's going to piggyback on a lot of systems we have, maybe a year for something like a C-130.
So if you buy it and you develop the aircraft, then do I have to go back and buy different tasks as add-ons to the programming? So
with the license, we include all of the upgrades for the current version you're on. If we were going to do another aircraft, we would it would be like a extra content. You wouldn't pay full price for the other aircraft. But again, we can talk, we can negotiate something that'll make sense. I think there's too many different cases to put just a single price on whatever it might be, but if it were an upgrade to another version of the system, there'd be another cost for that. But if you're talking about, hey, we just come up with a new platform, or now you can do manual release from pulling on the cable, like that's just going to be part of the system getting better and the features improving. That wouldn't be an extra cost.
You were talking about in the pilot training, they were able to take it home.
Yeah.
Is that, so that's scaled down, that's just like switch it and learn a little bit about the aircraft?
Well, I'll say they set it up in their house, in the dorms. So it was able to be used in their dorm room.
Okay.
Because they weren't moving around, they're sitting stationary in a seat, all they had to have was basically one sensor pointing at them, and it was a computer. So basically it was them sitting at a desk.
Okay.
This, because you're walking around and there's a boundary you gotta set, I wouldn't recommend you be like issued, okay, you gotta take this home tonight and set it up. But if the commander wanted to have it in his house, he could. Yes?
Yeah, so saw an engine fire on there, but is there internal malfunctions to do, hydraulic leaks, cargo fires, be able to grab the fire extinguisher, put out a cargo fire?
Yes and yes. Grabbing the fire extinguisher, we haven't gotten into this version of the demo yet, but that's on the roadmap to do. But yeah, we wanted to simulate electrical failure or ICS cuts out. We could. There's a lot we could do in addition to this, but it's certainly all possible. We talked about even modeling hypoxia. So if you don't have your mask on, your vision starts to go gray and tunnely, and you start to realize something's not right here. Oh, get my mask on. You can put on MBGs. We talked about doing simulated fires, so you're practicing calling defensive maneuvers when you see a manpad or tracers coming in. That's all possible. You can kind of get an idea once you get in there where you can go with this, and that's kind of what we happened at Little Rock. They just had a million different ideas for just doing walk-around training, the exterior inspection. I mean, the cool thing about it is you can even bring up augmented training aids that don't exist in the aircraft, but would help a new Loadmaster learn. For example, labels, like virtual labels on the station numbers, so they can get familiar with where everything is. And then the next sortie or the next check ride, you take those away so they actually learn it. But you can do like intermediate learning. So even if it's not realistic, we can. If you got an idea, we're open to it.
You have a crew bunk?
What's that? Oh, can you sleep in it? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I might have missed this. Is it compatible with wearing a aircrew headset?
It doesn't. No, you wouldn't be able to fit a headset over it, but the ears cover you can simulate the headset. So the sound coming through the Loadmaster instructor, he's got a microphone at the station, it'll sound like an ICS intercom. And you can simulate on the controller pushing a button like you would on your transmit key.
Because of the size of it, I'm trying to think, is there any way to make a oversized quick down or something that they could grab an oxygen mask of some sort?
That would probably require like a custom built thing, which, if they're high interest in, we could look at. We make all sorts of personnel protective equipment in our Virginia facility. They make survival vests and gear and flotation covers. But the way, for example, the way the NVGs work in the sim is you reach up above your head, you pull the trigger to grab, and you bring it down from your eyes. So the motion is the same, but you don't actually grab anything in the real world. We also have a tether that appears in VR, and you clip yourself in and tie down rings. So there's procedures in place to do it, but as far as the actual hardware, having the hardware interact with it, it's not really the focus of the sim.
Can you fall off the edge of the ramp?
You cannot. But I'm working with the developers to allow you to put your checklist on top of the CDS so it goes out with the load. I'm serious, because that's one of the things the Loadmaster said. inevitably somebody's going to do that, and we want to make sure we train them not to do that.
And the leather jacket.
And
And the leather jacket. Make sure that goes up.
yeah. Two Loadmasters? Yeah. It's meant to be used with two at the same time. You could basically get a room where you have 10 by 10 space over here, 10 by 10 space over here, and they'll work and talk to each other in the sim and point out where they should go and do their procedures. So one system, one person would buy you the Loadmaster instructor console and 2 sets of equipment for a Loadmaster crew of 2. Sure.
Is there a way to, I missed your first part of your meeting, but is there a way to interface this to a panel so you're actually touching switches, but you're seeing whatever you're seeing?
Like on the J?
Like on the Loadmaster panel, C17?
Right. Yes, there is a way to do that. So you're saying you would just have your regular hand reach out and flip a switch, and then you'd grab it in the real world, and it would have...
But you're seeing what...
Yeah.
Right.
That is possible. We haven't done that here, because the H doesn't have anything like that. But we've considered that for the J. That would increase the cost significantly, but it would give you a tactile feedback. We're currently debating if we're going to take that approach or if we're going to go with 100% virtual interface. There's pluses and minuses. We can talk in detail about that, but that is possible.
It's pretty important that they get the tactile feel with the visual, and we're currently working with 20-year-old apted views and 2D monitors and stuff. You've probably been in the simulator.
I've seen it. Our partner Pennant, they do make actual analog replications of equipment to train on. So they switches, turning wrenches on things. It certainly exists a capability, but we're trying to keep the cost down. But if it's going to be better overall to do that, then that can be done. And you would just have that system act as a controller for the virtual version, and you replay whatever happens there happens in the VR. And last questions? All right, well, thank you for your time. Again, we're thrilled to be here, and we'd love to come throw you out the back.